The PlayStation 2 library had something for everyone, and in this series we're going through every single game that I have in my collection. I'm up to over 85% of the full panel set for PS2, and as a result we've got most, but not necessarily all the games. But here's all the games that I have in my collection that begin with the letter L. Let's take a look. So let's begin with a fishing game. The PS2 has a lot of fishing games, and this is one of them. I'm not a fan of fishing, so I can't comment on how accurate this game is, but it's a tournament game where you're trying to increase your standing in the various rankings throughout the fishing season. So it's not simply a pick a lake and relax style of game, there's a lot of competitive fishing here. However, if you do just want to relax and have a bit of a fish, there is a freestyle mode as well, so it's trying to cover all its bases. I love tactical RPGs. They're a fantastic way to spend a few hours, and the dialogue is usually hilariously stupid, which is a bonus. Lapisel Tactics, also known as Lapisel Ragnarok, if you've played the PSP port, which was then ported to Windows, and then eventually ported to Switch in the NIS Classics Collection Volume 3, is a fantastical tactical RPG with some lovely graphics and brilliant gameplay. This one is a classic. It's almost as good as Disgaea, which happens to be my pinnacle of tactical RPGs, and if you're into this kind of game, you won't want to miss it. Ah, the Angle of Darkness! This could have been a great game, but it just isn't. It's another Tomb Raider that you can play if you've run out of better Tomb Raider games, I suppose, but it was clear at this point that the developers were tired and just wanted to move on. Best avoided unless you absolutely have to have all of the Tomb Raider games. Personally, I'd play the DVD game version instead, if I were you. Lara Croft Tomb Raider Anniversary is a remake of the original Tomb Raider game, with new cutscenes, nicer graphics, and updated technology, although you'll not notice that last one unless you're really paying attention. It's not bad, to be honest, and I enjoyed playing it, but I can't give it full marks, because it's copying all the great bits from the original game, and I don't give full marks if you're just copying your homework. Yes, there is another Tomb Raider game. After Angel of Darkness tanked the franchise into the ground, Eidos took it off the original developers and told Crystal Dynamics to give it a shot. They decided to effectively reboot Lara's backstory and produced Tomb Raider Legend, which wasn't the way I'd have personally gone with it, because this doesn't even remotely look like taking the franchise behind a woodshed and giving it a shotgun to the back of the head. Nevertheless, people apparently liked this one. I've not played an awful lot of it, to be honest with you. I played enough after buying it to make sure the game loaded, and I didn't need to take it back to get the disc cleaned. Then filed it on a shelf for later, and never got round to looking at it again. When I first played Largo Winch, my initial impression was that it felt like Grand Theft Auto, only with an even more unlikable protagonist. That impression could not have been further from the truth. This is a puzzle action game. It's more like a Tomb Raider or Uncharted than GTA. And the game is based on a popular French comic strip and TV show, which explains a lot about why it's a Belgian developer and it's published through Ubisoft. It's a fun game, and I'm considering it for a future Game Hammer Live full playthrough, although don't expect it to take many sessions to get through it because it's fairly easy. This is apparently part of the Rush series, but I can't say for certain if that's true because I just read it on Wikipedia while doing research for the video. I can't remember if I've got any games in the Rush set apart from this one, but to be fair, it's actually a pretty enjoyable racing game. Fairly open world, rather than those linear sets of courses that you normally get in a race, and the driving feels an awful lot like you'd find in a Need for Speed game, so it's not a bad option if you're looking for more racing games. Lassie is one of those games that will eventually feature in a top 10 games you didn't know were on PS2 video, when I eventually get through this collection tour and start making that kind of video. If I'm feeling particularly vindictive at the time, it will also feature on a top 10 games you should absolutely never play list, because it's awful and it should not exist. Published by Blast via Mastertronic, and featuring an amazing 6 levels of sub-indie game newcomer graphics and find your puppies gameplay, this monstrosity has to be seen to be believed, and let's face it, you don't need to believe. Leaderboard Golf is a golf game. As you might imagine, it's not a bad golf game and the controls work pretty good. But I have to admit, even though it's a fair game with a decent set of controls, I'd still rather play Tiger Woods or, these days, Golf 5 E-Club on Oculus Quest 2, which is actually amazing, even though it's got the stupidest sounding title that you would not believe how many times I've had to look up what this thing's called. It's a great golf game with a stupid name. Anyway, let's move on. League Series Baseball 2 is published by Midas and features wooden bats that make a metal bat noise when you hit a ball, which should be all you need to know about the quality of this game. It looks and plays like an enhanced PS1 game. I'm not a massive fan of baseball, and I have to admit I didn't enjoy playing this game. Maybe if you're a big fan, you'll find enough to like here, but the commentator feels artificial, the graphics don't look great, and the sound effects are terrible, so what is left? It's hard to do a character-based role-playing game justice when you've not played at least 30 hours of the thing, because we all know there's going to be a twist about halfway through the plot, somewhere around hour 50, and suddenly the game just becomes something completely different. Personally, I tend to avoid playing most character RPGs for that precise reason. I prefer an action RPG, since I don't have a spare 100 hours to fully get into a single game. This character RPG, which we used to call JRPGs, but apparently that title is somewhat offensive to Japanese developers because it kind of singles them out as being different to everyone else. And I kind of agree, so we're going to call it a character-based RPG. This is by Eidos, a Western developer, and there's another reason why you shouldn't call them JRPGs. If they're being made by people in the West, it's not a Japanese RPG, is it? And at the time it got fair to middling review scores, so make of that what you will. Legend of the Dragon is a game I forgot was on PlayStation 2 until I started compiling this list, which really says something, considering that I keep all of my PlayStation 2 games in alphabetical order. And all of the games that start with L are right above my main computer, practically at the eye line while I'm working. So, yeah. This is a fighting game by a budget European developer, and it plays a lot like someone took Virtua Fighter and mixed it with Jade Empire. It's surprisingly not bad. Legend of Hercules, on the other hand, is bad, and you should absolutely not play it. Well, I say play, the more accurate term would be endure. This is one of those Phoenix Games discs where the main selling point is actually the crap cartoon that they pulled off a VHS from an East German animation studio. The actual game part is a sliding tile puzzle, a jigsaw, some colouring bits, and that's just about it. I can't even bring myself to try most of this out because all of these bloody discs are equally terrible. Just avoid it. If you absolutely must see how bad the cartoon is, I have no doubt it's on YouTube somewhere. The Legacy of Kane series is synonymous with the PlayStation 1 era, but here's an entry on the PlayStation 2, and it's not bad. It's a standard action-adventure fare, and it's fairly fun to play. If you're a fan of the series, you'll definitely want this one to complete the set, but even if you're not a fan, there's a fair amount here to enjoy. So maybe one of these days we'll do a complete play of it on Game Hammer Live. Legend of K is a brilliant action platform game featuring a badass action hero who just happens to be a cute little kitty cat. And he just looks so damn cute when he's trying to act tough, it's hilarious. I love this one. It's another PS2 mascot platformer in the Jak and Daxter style, but it's absolutely worth checking out. Real good fun. So now we get to the Legend of Spyro Trilogy. This is the second set of Spyro games. These games are A New Beginning, The Eternal Night, and Dawn of the Dragon, and together they present the reboot of the original Spyro series on PlayStation 1, which also continued on PS2, so there's like 5 of them or something. While these games are still mascot platformers, there is far more emphasis on combat in this reboot trilogy. They're not bad games, but if you're a big fan of the originals, you might find them a little bit lacking in places because the old magic just isn't quite there. Oh boy, here we go. Legends of Wrestling 1 and 2 are wrestling games produced by Acclaim during Acclaim's "Hey, let's be idiots" phase. You know the phase, it's the one that led to them trying to advertise their games with headline-grabbing antics, such as paying people to name their children after people from their games, or trying to get people to put adverts for their games on the headstones of their recently deceased family members. I did not make any of that up, this is what they actually tried. Meanwhile, the games themselves were mediocre at best, and Legends of Wrestling is no exception. There's actually a third game, which made this a trilogy, but that's called Showdown Legends of Wrestling, so expect me to give this mess a good kicking for a second time when we get to the games that start with S. Legion, The Legend of Excalibur, feels a lot like it wants to be Diablo or maybe Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, but it doesn't quite hit the mark. It's playable, sure, but I'm not convinced that there's enough here to actually keep your interest in the medium term. Play Diablo or Dark Alliance instead, you'll have a much better time of it. Okay, let's get into the LEGO games. LEGO Batman is absolutely brilliant and I love it. I keep pushing it as an option for full play on Game Hammer Live, but it keeps losing out to stuff like Roller Coaster Tycoon or every single LucasArts point-and-click adventure game ever, which is a bit of a shame in my opinion. It's a fun comedy action adventure game where you can beat the crap out of Batman's villain roster, plus all of the local landscapes, all of the local furniture on the street, all of the local buildings, all of your sidekicks, and pretty much everything else. If you feel like it anyway, you don't have to. If you've ever played one of the many LEGO games, you know exactly what to expect on this because they all play pretty much the same. And to be fair, I really enjoy this style of game. LEGO Indiana Jones The Original Adventures is the same style of game as LEGO Batman. Only this time you're in the world of Indiana Jones, and instead of beating the crap out of Batman's villains library, you're beating the crap out of plastic fascists. And there is absolutely no downside to that one whatsoever. Again, this is the same quirky comedy and basic puzzle solving as always, and is still just as much fun. Then we have LEGO Racers 2, which sits in the middle of the LEGO set as the outlier. It's a basic racing game, and to be completely honest, it's quite shonky by racing standards. It's also incredibly easy, and you can beat the whole game in under 4 hours, because it's made for little kids. Let's move on. The LEGO Star Wars games are the games that got me into the LEGO gaming world. I haven't played these all the way through on PS2 because I picked up the expanded and enhanced version on the Wii, a version that I absolutely recommend by the way because it's a great fun game, and as a result I didn't feel the need to go straight back and play the original versions, but yeah, the original ones here on PS2, they're still good fun. I have played bits of it and it's a lot of fun. However, as with the Batman and Indiana Jones games, the Star Wars games, they play through the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy in a kind of LEGO condensed, slightly funny storyline style, where most of the puzzles are incredibly basic and the combat is very repetitive. You will either enjoy this game or you'll hate it because it gets repetitive. Personally, I find it a bit fun. They're nice ways to blow off some steam and not have to think about gaming an awful lot. It's one of those turn on, tune out type of games, and I love it. Leisure Suit Larry is a softcore pornographic series of adventure games from the 16-bit era that should really have died in the 90s. They're a product of their age and they don't fit well in the modern era. In terms of gameplay, in terms of comedy style, in terms of what the hell did they think they were doing when they tried to make this, it doesn't fit in well. And it didn't fit in well on the PS2 era either because even back then people were saying the comedy is stale and the jokes are far more in your face than they need to be to get the point across. It's not good. Le Mans 24 Hours is a game that you'll be able to see me play live as a charity fundraiser this October, as I play to complete the entire 24-hour course in one epic live stream. This is going to be quite a thing. As far as the game itself is concerned, it's a pretty good racing game, all things considered. Technically, it's part of the Test Drive series of games, which I thought started on the Amiga, but apparently they date all the way back to the Commodore 64, which makes these, like, veterans. I'm amazed. It's a fairly realistic racing game with a decent range of circuits available alongside the main Le Mans track. Definitely worth a look, even if the box makes it look like a budget offering. It's not. This is high class. Lemmings is a fantastic update of the old Amiga game that even includes the option of using the iToy camera to put yourself into the game as part of the scenery. You can have lemmings climb all over you. It's weird, but you can do it. I love this game. It's a lot of fun, and if you're into the old-style Lemmings games rather than the ones that they churned out later on, then you'll want to try this one out because it really is old-style Lemmings fun. It's great. Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events is quite a mouthful to say. It's an action-adventure game in the same style as the Harry Potter games. It really does feel like it's trying to be Harry Potter. The game's decent enough, and it was reasonably well received at the time as well. Not my personal favourite kind of game, but it's interesting enough. For those of you who enjoy the Ace Combat series but want a little bit more of a sci-fi twist, you'll love the Lethal Skies series. This is a fun game, but don't expect it to be easy because it can be a little tricky sometimes to learn all of the controls. It's a little fiddly here and there. I do like it though. Lethal Skies 2 is a bit more of a sci-fi themed sequel, and it's not bad. I really should go back and play it again because it's a lot of fun once you get used to it. Decent game, and again, if you enjoy the Ace Combat series, you will definitely want to check these ones out. Let's Make a Soccer Team is weird. It's just weird. It's a mixture of a visual novel-style role-playing game and Football Manager. I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, but all things considered, if that sounds interesting to you, definitely give it a try. Silverbuckle Stables, Let's Ride Silverbuckle Stables, is a game that I honestly cannot give a decent review to because it reminds me too much of growing up. The very nature of this is just like, no thanks. I grew up in the countryside and I couldn't leave quick enough. I've ridden horses, I grew up with friends who rode horses competitively, and this is basically a game based around what I saw when I was hanging out with my friends during my upbringing. And I think that's why I hate it, because it's too close to home, and I didn't enjoy living in the countryside. Sorry. Little Britain, the video game, should not exist. It's technically a game, but only in the same sense that getting one of those really old LCD racing games where you do nothing but dodge oncoming cars by moving left and right is technically a game. Little Britain is a collection of entry-level, beginner's attempts at flash games-style mini-games featuring the crap characters from a crap TV show that is so bad that BBC TV refuses to show it anymore. Yeah, avoid. The LMA series is a hands-on Football Manager series that's not all that dissimilar to Championship Manager or the old Football Manager games. Now, my dad and I used to play that kind of game a lot when I was a teenager, and I loved Championship Manager, although maybe I love it most because it meant that it was a game that my dad and I could share and enjoy playing together. As a result, we got to spend a lot of time sharing a hobby, which was unusual for us because we have very drastically different hobbies. But I wasn't as much of a fan of LMA Manager as I was of Championship Manager, and I think that's mostly because while Championship Manager puts the emphasis on the backroom style of management, LMA Manager is really highlighting the during the game management, and it's a very different style as a result. So if you really want to go deep into play-by-play management of football, you'll probably prefer LMA Manager. Okay, here's a weird series to sink our teeth into. Davalex have a particular style of game that utilizes their weird car driving engine a lot, and they really do try to get as much use out of that thing as possible, hence the Autobahn Razer series that I've covered in a previous video, and the London Racer series, which turns out is actually just Autobahn Razer in English translations. I'm not kidding. Put this disc in and select German language. You'll be playing Autobahn Razer. I found this out after hunting down a copy of Autobahn Razer Destruction Madness and selecting the English language option, only to be presented with a game that I already bloody owned. I couldn't believe it, man. Good grief, these games are crap. Imagine any budget level racing game where the cars are just that little bit too heavy and a little bit too oversteery, and you'll be imagining what it's like to play the London Racer series. London Taxi Rush Hour, on the other hand, is just Crazy Taxi. It mugged Crazy Taxi in a dark alley and nicked its wallet, its keys, its car, and its life. This is Crazy Taxi. It's a Crazy Taxi clone by a budget developer. Funnily enough, it's actually pretty good to play. But, well, actually, no, not funnily enough, because Crazy Taxi is fun to play, and this is Crazy Taxi. Looney Tunes Acme Arsenal is a 3D puzzle platformer with a lot of combat elements and a huge dollop of the Looney Tunes characters. It's a hell of a lot of fun, and if you're into mascot platformers, you're gonna love this one. I know I did. I enjoyed playing it. Don't expect a long game, however, as you can do a complete run through of this thing in about 3 hours if you're good at 3D platforming. Another mascot platformer with the Looney Tunes characters is Back in Action, but this time it's clocking in at around 4 hours. So if you're looking for more to do after Acme Arsenal, you'll definitely enjoy it. But Back in Action puts more emphasis on the item collecting than the combat. So if you're not a fan of what is essentially the collect-em-up subgenre of mascot platforming, you'll not enjoy this one quite as much as Acme Arsenal. It took me years to track down a copy of Aragons Quest on PS2, so I'm leaning toward this game being somewhat uncommon, perhaps even rare on PlayStation 2. It's more widely available on the Wii, so if you want to play it, you might have a better time grabbing that version. This is a Diablo-style hack-and-slash game with some action platformer elements, and yeah, it's decent enough, but I have to admit I was a little soured by it because of how long it took to find a copy. The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, clocks in at under 3 hours of gameplay and has nothing to do with the widely adored EA series of games from the same franchise. So if you're expecting another one of the EA trilogy, well, actually it was only a duology. The Fellowship of the Ring feels more like a Hobbit-themed Legend of Zelda. I am not kidding. It has so many Legend of Zelda feels to it. This is not necessarily a bad thing, of course, if it's done right, but this one's not done right. It's actually quite a poor offering, and I wouldn't recommend it unless you're a Tolkien fan and absolutely have to have everything that's been produced in the Lord of the Rings franchise. Also, they turned Tom Bombadil into a weird Scottish dude that sings in a baritone, and that just isn't what I pictured of him at all. The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King are the duology that I mentioned earlier. The Return of the King and The Two Towers are some of the greatest action combat games that are available on PlayStation 2. I played so much of these games over the years, both on PS2 and Xbox, whereas a lot of film tie-in games have that notorious reputation of being below-average cash grabs. These are the exception to the rule. They're fantastic. These are games in their own right that just happen to be film tie-ins, and they absolutely deserve to be played. I love them. They're brilliant. If you ever wanted to feel like you're a part of the Lord of the Rings story, but not with as much pressure on you, or if you wish that the Lord of the Rings felt more like Final Fantasy, then here's the game for you. In the Third Age, you play as Elrond's B team, the backup guys, who are just as good as the main guys, but who are following along about 10 minutes behind Aragorn and company, just in case things screw up. You fight the same monsters, deal with the same challenges, and have all of the same adventures, but you don't actually have to carry the One Ring and deal with all of that nonsense. So you've got a bit of a better time of it. I seriously don't know why this couldn't have just been Frodo and that company, with all of their story just retold in a turn-based RPG style, but here we are. I adored the Lotus series of games back in the 8 and 16-bit days, so I picked up Lotus Challenge with glee. Sadly, a lot of the charm from the old days just isn't here, because this feels a lot more like a middle-of-the-road supercar racing game. The in-game sounds are so poor, and so is the music, it's awful. So if you do want to play this one, I'd suggest turning the sound off and putting on some kick-ass rock music. Lucinda Green's Equestrian Challenge is one of the worst games that I have ever played. If you want a horse game, go for that weird Barbie one or Silver Buckle Stables, and avoid this. There are rhythm game elements in this which don't work properly because the controls are too unresponsive for you to be able to make a go of it, and I just cannot recommend this one at all. Avoid it. But hey, let's end on a high note. Lumines Plus, the PS2 sequel to the amazing PlayStation Portable music puzzle game, is wonderful. I absolutely adore this game. It's so simple to learn, but incredibly addictive. You'll quickly get sucked into its gameplay and want, just one more go. I've got time. Just one more go. And then before you know it, what's happened? It's 3 AM. You've lost an entire evening to it. That's what's happened. What a superb game. Absolute gem. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that look into the PlayStation 2 library. As you can see, there's something for everyone in this system, and its range of games are quite phenomenal. I really do enjoy the PS2, but I'd love to hear what you think about these games that we talked about today, and are any of them your personal favourites? Do let me know in the comments section down below. But until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk Robinson, you've been watching Game Hammer Extra. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time. If you like the show, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help create future videos. That's patreon.com/Zoe Kirk Robinson. And I've got an extra special thanks going out to Chief89, Sam Yates, Retro Mickey 82, Mo Henry, and George Botterini. Thank you so much, guys.